London, 1845. The Duke of Fallsworth had long considered himself immune to the frivolities of the heart. As Vincent Fallsworth stood before the ornate mirror in his Mayfair townhouse, adjusting the perfectly starched cravat at his throat, he embodied the aristocratic ideal, wealth beyond measure, a title older than most of the nobility's memory could trace, and a face that, while not conventionally handsome, carried the sharp angles and authoritative gaze that commanded respect in any room. "Your correspondence, Your Grace," his butler announced, placing a silver tray laden with letters onto the mahogany desk. Vincent nodded dismissively. "Thank you, Harrison. I'll attend to them shortly." The butler hesitated, something unusual for the typically efficient servant. "There is one that perhaps requires immediate attention, Your Grace. It bears the seal of Havenswood Manor." At the mention of the estate, Vincent's hand stilled against his cravat. Havenswood, his late father's country residence, abandoned these last 5 years. Nothing good ever came from that place, only memories best left buried beneath its crumbling stones. "Burn it," Vincent commanded, his voice cutting through the morning air like a winter frost. "Whatever demands they make can be directed to my solicitor." "As you wish, Your Grace." Harrison bowed and retreated, the offending letter still upon the tray. Vincent turned back to his reflection, seeing not the polished Duke of today, but the shadow of a boy who had learned early that love was a weakness the aristocracy could ill afford. His father had taught him that lesson well, through cruel words and colder silences. The old Duke had loved once, Vincent's mother, and when she died birthing him, the man had never recovered. Love had destroyed him, turning a powerful Duke into a shell who retreated to Havenswood and drank himself to death over 2 long decades. Vincent had sworn never to follow that path. He had built his life on rational decisions, advantageous connections, and a perfectly ordered existence. He'd inherited a dukedom on the brink of financial ruin and restored it through shrewd investments and calculated alliances. At 32, he was considered the most eligible bachelor in London, and he intended to maintain that position until he eventually selected a bride based on practical considerations. Bloodlines, dowry, connections, not something as unpredictable as affection. Love, Vincent Fallsworth believed, was a luxury for those who could afford its inevitable disappointments. A duke could afford nothing but excellence. 3 days later, Vincent stood in the cavernous entrance hall of Havenswood Manor, surrounded by dust cloths and memories he had spent years methodically avoiding. "Your Grace, I must apologize for the state of the place." Mr. Perkins, the estate steward, wrung his hands as he led Vincent through the shadowy corridor. "With your instructions to maintain only essential upkeep, we've focused on the structural integrity rather than the aesthetics." Vincent nodded curtly. "Quite understandable. This visit is merely to assess what must be done before the property is sold." The words hung between them like a pronouncement of death. Havenswood Manor had been in the Fallsworth family for 6 generations. Selling it would sever the last physical connection to his father, something Vincent had decided was long overdue. "There is one matter requiring your immediate attention," Perkins continued, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "The north wing, your father's private quarters, we've maintained them precisely as instructed, locked and undisturbed. However, there appears to be," he trailed off, "appears to be what, Perkins? I haven't all day for mysteries." "Someone living there, Your Grace." Vincent stopped abruptly. "Living there, in my father's sealed chambers. Explain yourself immediately." "For the past fortnight, the staff has reported lights in the windows, candles burning through the night, items moved, yet the doors remain locked from within. The housekeeper believes," he hesitated again. "Believes what?" Vincent demanded, his patience evaporating. "That it's a ghost, Your Grace, your father's ghost, come to protest the sale of his beloved home." Vincent would have laughed had the situation not been so absurd. "I assure you, Perkins, my father has no interest in Havenswood's fate. He demonstrated that quite thoroughly by drinking himself to death within its walls." He removed a ring of keys from his waistcoat pocket. "Show me to the north wing immediately." As they ascended the grand staircase, Vincent felt the weight of the estate pressing upon him. Havenswood had always felt more like a mausoleum than a home, even when he was a child. Every room held some memory of disappointment or rejection. His father's study, where Vincent had been told repeatedly he would never measure up to the Fallsworth name. The gallery where portraits of ancestors judged his every movement. The library where he had once found his father unconscious among empty bottles on his 10th birthday. The north wing had been strictly forbidden to Vincent as a child. Later, as a young man, he'd never had the inclination to explore it. After his father's death, he'd ordered it sealed, finding a strange comfort in the symbolic imprisonment of all the old Duke had been. They reached the heavy oak doors that separated the north wing from the rest of the manor. Vincent selected a large brass key and turned it in the lock, which yielded with surprising ease. "Wait here," he instructed Perkins, stepping alone into the darkened corridor. The air smelled of dust and something else, something living. A faint scent of lavender. Vincent paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness. The hallway stretched before him, doors lining each side, leading to rooms he had never entered. At the far end, a thin line of light spilled from beneath a door. Vincent moved silently down the corridor, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As he approached the illuminated door, he heard a sound, soft, rhythmic, like someone humming a half-remembered melody. Without announcing himself, he pushed the door open. The room beyond was a study, similar to his father's main one, yet somehow warmer. A fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the book-lined walls. And there, seated at a small writing desk, her back to him, was a woman. She was bent over a journal, writing by the light of a single candle. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, was loosely plaited down her back. She wore a simple grey dress, modest but well-tailored. "Who are you?" Vincent demanded, his voice sharp with authority. "And what are you doing in my house?" The woman startled violently, jumping to her feet and whirling to face him. The candle flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish. She steadied it with trembling hands before looking up at him. Vincent found himself staring into eyes the color of spring moss, wide with shock and something akin to recognition. Her face was not conventionally beautiful, too solemn, her cheekbones too pronounced, but there was a quiet dignity to her features that commanded attention. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a perfect curtsy. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am Amelia Astor." The name meant nothing to him. "That tells me who you are, Miss Astor, not why you are trespassing in my father's private chambers." She straightened, her posture impeccable despite her obvious discomfort. "I am not trespassing, Your Grace. I have been permitted to use these rooms since your father's passing." "By whom?" "By your father himself." Vincent felt his patience slipping. "My father has been dead for 5 years, Miss Astor. Unless you commune with spirits, I fail to see how he granted you anything." A flush crept up her neck. "I meant before his passing, Your Grace. It was arranged in his will that I would be allowed to remain at Havenswood as the estate librarian and archivist." "That is impossible. I oversaw the execution of my father's will personally." "There was no mention of an archivist, nor of you." She moved to a cabinet near the fireplace and unlocked it with a small key she withdrew from her pocket. From within, she produced a folded document bearing his father's seal. "Perhaps this will explain matters more clearly, Your Grace." Vincent took the paper, unfolded it, and scanned the contents. It was indeed in his father's hand, dated 3 weeks before his death. It detailed the appointment of one Miss Amelia Astor to the position of librarian and archivist of Havenswood Manor, with accommodation in the north wing and an annual stipend to be paid from the estate's accounts. "This is not legally binding," Vincent said dismissively. "It was not included in the official will." "If you'll note the addendum, Your Grace, it was meant to be included. Your father instructed his solicitor, Mr. Winters, to ensure it was added. Whether that instruction was carried out," she let the implication hang in the air between them. Vincent's jaw tightened. Winters had been his father's solicitor, not his. He dismissed the man shortly after taking control of the dukedom, finding his methods outdated and inefficient. "Why would my father appoint a librarian to a house he knew would stand empty after his death?" Vincent asked, studying her face for signs of deception. The Duke valued the Fallsworth collection. He wished it to be properly maintained and catalogued, regardless of whether the house was occupied. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "I have been fulfilling that duty for these past 5 years, and receiving payment from my estate without my knowledge. The steward was informed. Mr. Perkins has been providing my stipend quarterly, as instructed." Vincent made a mental note to have a very pointed conversation with Perkins about this oversight. "That still doesn't explain why you're hiding in these rooms, using them as if they were your own." For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. "After your letter arrived announcing your intention to sell Havenswood, I thought it best to begin organizing your father's personal papers. Many contain sensitive information about the family and estate. I believed you would wish to review them before they passed into strange hands." It was a reasonable explanation, yet Vincent sensed there was something more she wasn't telling him. Her eyes, so direct before, now avoided his. "You will vacate these rooms immediately," he said. "If your position is legitimate, something I intend to verify, you may continue your work from the main library. The North Wing is not for staff accommodation, regardless of what my father may have promised." She nodded once, her expression carefully controlled. "Of course, Your Grace. I'll gather my belongings at once." Vincent turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Astor, how did you come to be appointed to this position? Were you previously acquainted with my father?" A shadow passed over her face, too quick to interpret. "Yes, Your Grace. I was acquainted with the late Duke for several years before his passing." "In what capacity?" "I was a tutor to the children at Thornfield Hall, the neighboring estate. Your father often visited Lord Thornfield's library. We shared an interest in historical texts." It sounded plausible enough. His father had been an educated man, despite his many flaws, yet something in her tone made Vincent suspicious, a careful neutrality that suggested rehearsed words. "I see, you have until morning to relocate yourself. Good night, Miss Astor." As he closed the door behind him, Vincent caught a glimpse of her face in the candlelight. For just a moment, her composure slipped, revealing something that looked remarkably like grief. "She claims to be the archivist," Vincent explained to his solicitor 2 days later, pacing before the fireplace in Havenswood's main study. "Appointed by my father, and somehow paid from estate funds for 5 years without my knowledge." Mr. Ellis, a shrewd man in his 40s who had served Vincent faithfully since he assumed the title, frowned over the document Amelia had provided. "It appears genuine, Your Grace. Your father's handwriting and seal are unmistakable. However, without proper inclusion in the will, its legal standing is questionable at best." "Can I dismiss her without consequences?" "Legally, yes." "Morally," Ellis hesitated. "If your father made this promise, and she has been fulfilling her duties all these years." Vincent waved away the concern. "Morality is irrelevant. This is a matter of proper estate management. I cannot have unknown individuals drawing salaries from my accounts." "As you wish, Your Grace. Shall I draft a termination notice with a suitable severance?" Vincent paused by the window, looking out over Havenswood's neglected gardens. In the distance, he could see a slender figure moving between the rose bushes, Miss Astor, carrying a basket and garden shears. She had relocated to the servants' quarters as instructed, without complaint, and had been remarkably scarce since their encounter. "Not yet," he decided. "I wish to understand how this arrangement came to be before I end it. Speak to Perkins. Find out what he knows about Miss Astor's history with my father." As Ellis departed, Vincent found his thoughts returning to the mysterious librarian. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at him, a familiarity that unsettled him. She had known his father clearly, but to what extent? The late Duke had not been known for forming friendships, particularly not with young women from neighboring estates. That evening, unable to sleep in the oppressive silence of Havenswood, Vincent made his way to the library. He told himself he was merely inspecting the collection he intended to sell, but in truth, he was looking for evidence of Miss Astor's work, and perhaps some explanation for her presence. The library was vast, spanning 2 floors with towering shelves and reading alcoves nestled between them. It had been his childhood sanctuary, the one place his father rarely ventured during daylight hours. Vincent lit a lamp and moved deeper into the room. The air smelled of leather, paper, and beeswax, evidence of careful maintenance. Despite 5 years of minimal staff, there was remarkably little dust. On the central table, he found a large ledger, open to a partially completed inventory. Miss Astor's handwriting was neat and precise, each entry detailing a book's condition, location, and any notable features. It was meticulous work, done with evident care. Beside the ledger lay several smaller journals, reading diaries, it seemed. Vincent picked one up and flipped through it. It contained thoughtful reflections on various texts, written in the same elegant hand. He was grudgingly impressed by the depth of analysis. A sound at the door made him look up. Miss Astor stood in the entrance, a candle in her hand, surprise evident on her face. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying. "I didn't expect anyone to be here at this hour." Vincent realized it must be well past midnight. "Nor did I expect you, Miss Astor. Do you typically work at such hours?" She stepped further into the library, her candle casting her face in soft relief. She had changed from her day dress into a simpler gown, her hair loosely braided for sleep. She looked younger, less guarded. "I often work in the evenings. The silence helps me concentrate." She nodded toward the ledger. "I see you found my cataloging records." "Yes, your work appears thorough." "Thank you, Your Grace." A slight smile touched her lips, transforming her solemn face. "The Fallsworth collection deserves nothing less." Vincent replaced the journal he'd been examining. "You seem to have a genuine appreciation for books." "They have been my constant companions," she replied. Then, with surprising boldness, "as I believe they once were yours." Vincent stiffened. "You presume much about a man you've never met." "Forgive me," she said, though she didn't appear particularly contrite. "Your father often mentioned your love of literature. He was quite proud of your scholarly achievements at Oxford." The word struck Vincent like a physical blow. His father proud. The man had never expressed anything but disappointment in his presence. "You are mistaken," he said coldly. "My father made his opinion of me abundantly clear throughout his life. I would thank you not to invent sentiments that never existed." Miss Astor's expression softened with something dangerously close to pity. "I apologize if I've caused offense, Your Grace. I spoke only what I heard from the Duke himself." Before Vincent could respond, she moved to a nearby shelf and removed a volume bound in faded green leather. "Perhaps this might interest you. Your father kept a collection of your essays and correspondence from university. He had them bound together." She held out the book. Vincent stared at it as if it might burn him. "My father kept nothing of mine," he said, making no move to take it. "He kept this," she insisted softly, still offering the volume, "and he read it often." Reluctantly, Vincent accepted the book. Opening it, he found his own youthful handwriting staring back at him. Essays on classical literature, philosophical treatises, letters to professors. All things he had written during his time at Oxford, never imagining his father would see them, let alone preserve them. "Where did you find this?" he demanded, his voice rougher than intended. "In your father's private study, the room where you found me. He kept it in the drawer of his desk." She hesitated, then added, "There are others. Letters you wrote to him that were never sent, compositions from your childhood." "He saved them all." Vincent snapped the book closed, unwilling to believe what it suggested. "You are painting a picture of a sentimental man who bore no resemblance to the father I knew." "Perhaps you knew different aspects of the same man, Your Grace." The quiet certainty in her voice infuriated him. How dare this stranger presume to tell him about his own father, a man who had looked at Vincent with nothing but cold disapproval for as long as he could remember. "You overstep, Miss Astor. Whatever relationship you had with my father does not grant you insight into matters between us." He placed the book on the table with deliberate care, despite his desire to throw it across the room. "I suggest you confine your attention to the library and leave family history to those who lived it." She accepted his rebuke with a slight nod, though her eyes, those unsettlingly perceptive eyes, remained steady on his. "As you wish, Your Grace. Will there be anything else?" "No, you may go." She curtsied again and turned to leave, the light of her candle receding toward the door. "Miss Astor," Vincent called after her, surprising himself. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. How long did you know my father? Something complicated passed across her face, too quickly for him to interpret in the dim light. 7 years, Your Grace. And in all that time, did you find him to be a kind man? The question hung in the air between them. Vincent hadn't meant to ask it, didn't know why he cared for this stranger's assessment of a man long dead. I found him to be a man in great pain, she answered carefully. But beneath that pain, yes, there was kindness. Good night, Your Grace. As the door closed behind her, Vincent was left alone with the bound volume of his past and the unsettling sensation that Amelia Astor knew far more about the Fallsworth family than she was telling. The following days brought torrential rain to Havenswood, trapping Vincent indoors and forcing him to confront the memories that seeped from every corner of the estate. He found himself increasingly drawn to the library, ostensibly to oversee the inventory of what would be sold, but in reality to observe Miss Astor at her work. She maintained a professional distance, speaking only when spoken to, yet Vincent could not shake the feeling that she was constantly evaluating him, measuring him against some standard he couldn't discern. It was most unsettling. These first editions should fetch a handsome price at auction, Vincent remarked one afternoon, running his fingers along a shelf of leather-bound classics. They appear to be in excellent condition. Mrs. Astor looked up from her cataloguing, a small furrow appearing between her brows. You intend to sell the books separately from the estate? Of course, the collection is far too valuable to include in the general sale. I've already contacted several auction houses in London. She set down her pen with deliberate care. The books belong at Havenswood, Your Grace. They were collected over generations, specifically for this library. Books, Miss Astor, like all possessions, belong to their owner. And as their owner, I am free to dispose of them as I see fit. Even if it means dismantling your family's legacy. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, despite her outwardly respectful demeanor. Vincent raised an eyebrow. My family's legacy extends far beyond a collection of dusty volumes in an abandoned country house. Does it? She gestured to the surrounding shelves. These books contain the thoughts, interests, and values of 6 generations of Fallsworths. They tell the story of your family in a way no other possession could. You seem remarkably invested in preserving a heritage that isn't yours, Vincent observed, studying her face. One might almost think you had a personal stake in Havenswood's future. A flush colored her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. I have dedicated 5 years to preserving these books. I would naturally prefer they remain intact. For sentimental reasons. For scholarly ones, she countered. Divided, they are merely valuable antiques. Together, they form one of the most comprehensive private libraries in England. Vincent found himself both irritated and intrigued by her passion. And if the estate is sold with the library intact, what becomes of the archivist? Have you considered that, Miss Astor? The question seemed to catch her off guard. I assumed my position would end with the sale, regardless. Then why fight for the collection to remain intact, if you will no longer be its caretaker? She looked around the library, her expression softening. Because some things deserve to be preserved, even if we ourselves are no longer there to see them. The sentiment struck Vincent as naively idealistic, yet there was something in her sincerity that he found difficult to dismiss. Before he could respond, Harrison entered the library. Pardon the interruption, Your Grace, but Mr. Ellis has returned from the village with information you requested. Very good. I'll see him in the study immediately. Vincent turned back to Miss Astor. We will continue this discussion another time. The books remain mine to sell, however passionate your objections. As he left the library, Vincent caught a glimpse of her face, not angry as he might have expected, but sad, with a resigned dignity that somehow unsettled him more than outright defiance would have. In his study, Ellis waited with a carefully neutral expression that immediately put Vincent on alert. What have you discovered about Miss Astor? Vincent asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Ellis cleared his throat. It's rather complicated, Your Grace. Miss Astor did indeed serve as a governess at Thornfield Hall, as she claimed. However, she left that position approximately 7 years ago to become your father's companion. Companion, Vincent repeated, his mind immediately leaping to scandalous conclusions. "You mean to say she was his mistress?" "No, your grace," Ellis replied quickly. "At least not according to anyone I spoke with. She was hired as a paid companion to read to him, manage correspondence, assist with his scholarly interests. By all accounts, their relationship was entirely proper." Vincent frowned. Why would my father, who detested company of any kind, especially female company, hire a companion? "That is unclear, however, Mr. Perkins confirmed that she took up residence in the East Wing, not the North where you found her. Her relocation there occurred only after your father's death. And no one thought to inform me of her presence all these years." Ellis looked uncomfortable. "The staff believed you were aware, your grace. The instructions regarding her position and stipend were included in the documents you received after your father's passing." Vincent recalled the mountain of paperwork that had accompanied his inheritance, much of which he had delegated to his London solicitors to handle. Had they overlooked this arrangement, or had they simply assumed it was a minor household matter not worthy of his attention? "There is one more thing, your grace," Ellis continued, hesitation evident in his voice. "It concerns the circumstances of Miss Astor's appointment." "Go on." "According to Perkins, your father became quite dependent on Miss Astor in his final years. He was fond of her in a paternal way. The staff believed he saw her as the daughter he never had." The words landed like stones in Vincent's chest. A daughter. His father, who had barely acknowledged his own son, had found a surrogate daughter in a former governess. "Is that all?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully controlled. "There's one more detail that may be significant." Ellis hesitated again. "Miss Astor was present at your father's deathbed. She was, in fact, the only person with him when he passed. Perkins said the Duke specifically requested her presence and sent everyone else away." Vincent stood abruptly, moving to the window to hide the emotion that threatened to overtake his features. Outside, the rain continued to fall, blurring the view of Havenswood's grounds into watercolor smudges of green and grey. "Thank you, Ellis. That will be all for now." When the door closed behind his solicitor, Vincent remained at the window, grappling with a confusion of feelings he had long believed himself incapable of experiencing. Jealousy, primarily, raw and primitive, that this stranger had been granted the connection to his father that he had spent his childhood desperately seeking. But beneath that, something more unsettling. The possibility that he had fundamentally misunderstood the man who had shaped his life through absence and disappointment. If his father had been capable of paternal affection for Amelia Astor, what did that say about his inability to show the same to his own son? That night sleep eluded Vincent. Havenswood creaked and sighed around him, its ancient timbers protesting the relentless rain. After hours of restless tossing, he abandoned his bed and pulled on a dressing gown. The house was silent as he made his way through the shadowy corridors, a single candle lighting his path. He had no particular destination in mind, merely the need to move, to escape the confines of his thoughts. Almost without conscious decision, his steps led him to the north wing, to his father's private chambers where he had discovered Miss Astor. He told himself he merely wished to examine the rooms properly, now that they were unoccupied, but in truth, he was searching for answers to questions he could barely articulate. The door was unlocked, as he expected. Inside, the rooms were neat and empty, showing no trace of Miss Astor's occupation save for the faint lingering scent of lavender. Vincent moved through the sitting room to the study beyond, where he had first encountered her. In daylight, he hadn't fully appreciated the character of the space. Unlike his father's main study downstairs, a formal, imposing room designed to intimidate, this was a place of comfort. The furnishings were well worn, the books arranged not for show but for use, with markers protruding from many volumes. Vincent set his candle on the desk and began opening drawers. Most contained mundane items, writing implements, stationery, reading glasses. But in the bottom drawer, locked but yielding easily to the master key he carried, he found a leather journal. The first page bore his father's distinctive handwriting, dated 6 years earlier. "My physician tells me I have perhaps 2 years remaining if I moderate my consumption of brandy. As this seems unlikely, I must assume less. These pages will serve as my private thoughts, to be destroyed upon my death. Vincent should have closed the journal then, respecting his father's wishes for privacy even in death. Instead, he turned the page. The entries that followed chronicled his father's final years, his declining health, his regrets, his scholarly pursuits, and woven throughout, references to Miss A and increasingly simply Amelia. Miss A arrived today with the books I requested from Cambridge. Her efficiency continues to impress, though I suspect she added several volumes she believes will interest me. Her presumption should irritate me, but I find it strangely touching. Discussed Byron with Amelia this afternoon. Her insights are remarkably astute for one so young. She reminds me of, but no, that is a dangerous line of thinking. Amelia caught me with the brandy again. Her disappointment is more effective than any physician's warnings. Have promised to reduce my intake, though I doubt I'll keep to it when she's not watching. As the entries progressed, Vincent found himself drawn into the portrait of his father that emerged, a man still aloof and difficult, yet capable of warmth and humor that Vincent had never witnessed. The jealousy he had felt earlier returned, sharper now. Then he turned a page and found his own name. Vincent's letter arrived today from London, formal and distant as always. I cannot blame him. I taught him too well to hide his feelings, to equate vulnerability with weakness. My greatest failing as a father, one of many. Vincent's breath caught. He read on. Amelia suggested I write to Vincent to attempt reconciliation before it's too late. She doesn't understand that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. The boy has his mother's eyes but my pride, a damnable inheritance. Showed Amelia Vincent's Oxford essays today. Her admiration for his mind gratifies me more than it should. She says I should tell him of my pride in his accomplishments, as if such sentiments could be expressed after a lifetime of their absence. The entries continued in this vein, revealing a man tormented by regret, yet unable to bridge the chasm he had created. A man who spoke of his son often, who collected his achievements in secret, who was proud but incapable of expressing it. The final entry, dated 3 days before his death, read simply, Amelia knows everything now. She has promised to try, though I have no right to ask it of her. Vincent will never forgive me, but perhaps he can be spared the worst of it. That would be mercy enough. Vincent closed the journal, his hands trembling. What had his father meant? What had he asked of Amelia? And what was there to forgive? Lost in thought, he didn't immediately register the sound of footsteps in the outer room. When he looked up, Amelia stood in the doorway, a candle in her hand, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding as she saw the journal before him. You shouldn't be reading that, she said quietly. You shouldn't be here at all, Vincent countered, though without heat. These are no longer your quarters. I saw the light and thought someone might be trespassing. She moved into the room, her nightdress and wrapper modest, but still startlingly intimate in the late-night setting. I didn't expect to find the Duke himself. Vincent held up the journal. He mentions you frequently. He confided in you. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Yes. What did he ask of you, at the end? He wrote that you promised to try something. Amelia's face grew solemn. I don't believe you're ready for that answer, Your Grace. It concerns me. I have a right to know. Yes, she agreed softly, you do. But there are some truths that require preparation. You've only just discovered your father was not entirely the man you believed him to be. Perhaps that's enough revelation for one night. Vincent stood, suddenly aware of how close they were in the small study, how the candlelight softened her features, making her seem both younger and somehow ageless. You speak to me with remarkable freedom, Miss Astor. Most would fear to be so direct with a duke. A sad smile touched her lips. I spent 5 years with a duke who valued directness over flattery. Besides, what have I to fear? You've already decided to dismiss me and sell the estate. My position is lost regardless of how I address you. There was no bitterness in her tone, merely a statement of fact, yet Vincent felt an unexpected pang of something like guilt. She had served his family faithfully, had been important to his father, had maintained Havenswood when he himself couldn't bear to visit it. I haven't officially decided to dismiss you, he said, surprising himself. Your position might be maintained, depending on what arrangements are made for the library. Hope flickered briefly across her face, quickly masked. That's very generous, Your Grace, but I think we both know my time at Havenswood is coming to an end. She moved to take the journal from his hands. You should return this to its place. Your father never intended for anyone to read it, least of all you. Yet you knew of its existence. Yes, he asked me to destroy it after his death, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. She glanced away. Perhaps I hoped that someday you might need to read it, to understand him better. And do you think I understand him better now? Vincent asked, genuinely curious about her perception. Amelia considered the question carefully. I think you've glimpsed another side of him. Understanding requires more time, and perhaps more willingness to reconsider what you believe to be true. Her insight was uncomfortably acute. Vincent found himself both irritated by her presumption and strangely compelled by her perception. It's late, he said abruptly, extinguishing his candle. We should both return to our quarters. Amelia nodded, stepping back to allow him to pass. As they walked together down the darkened corridor, their way lit only by her small flame, Vincent was acutely aware of her presence beside him, neither servant nor equal, occupying some undefined space that defied the rigid social boundaries by which he had always lived. At the junction where they would part ways, he to the master's chambers, she to the servants' wing, Vincent paused. My father trusted you, he said, the words somewhere between accusation and acknowledgement. Yes, she replied simply. Why? Amelia's gaze met his, unwavering in the candlelight. Because I saw him as he was, flawed, difficult, often unkind, and remained anyway. Most people either feared him too much to be honest, or wanted too much from him to be sincere. And what did you want from him, Miss Astor? The question hung between them, intimate and searching. Nothing he couldn't freely give, she answered, her voice soft but steady. Conversation, respect, the chance to be useful. Vincent studied her face, searching for signs of deception and finding none. Good night, Miss Astor. Good night, Your Grace. As he watched her walk away, the light of her candle receding into the darkness, Vincent was struck by the strange sensation that he had encountered not just a former employee of his father's, but a keeper of secrets that might fundamentally alter how he understood his past, and perhaps his future. The rain continued for days, keeping Vincent at Havenswood longer than he had intended. He found himself seeking out Amelia's company with increasing frequency, ostensibly to discuss the library, but in reality, driven by a curiosity he couldn't quite suppress. They developed a routine of sorts, afternoons in the library, where she would show him particularly interesting volumes from the collection, explaining their provenance and significance with evident passion. Evenings often found them in the smaller library, adjoining the drawing room, where Vincent would read correspondence from his London business affairs, while Amelia continued her cataloguing nearby. It was during one such evening that Vincent received a letter that visibly disturbed him. Troubling news? Amelia asked, noticing his frown. Vincent hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing his concerns with anyone, let alone someone whose position in his household remained ambiguous. Yet he found himself answering. Lord Pembroke's banking house is facing collapse. He's calling in outstanding loans to maintain liquidity. And this affects you directly? Her question was careful, not presuming too much familiarity. Indirectly. Several of my investments are tied to enterprises that rely on Pembroke's credit. If they fail, he didn't need to complete the thought. Financial entanglements could bring down even the wealthiest of families if the connections were sufficiently complex. Amelia set aside her ledger. Your father faced a similar crisis about 7 years ago. The cotton market collapsed, and several of his investments were severely impacted. Vincent looked up sharply. I was unaware of any financial difficulties. The estate appeared stable when I inherited it. It was, by then. Your father made some rather unconventional decisions to weather the crisis. What sort of unconventional decisions? She hesitated. He diversified into areas most aristocrats avoid, manufacturing primarily. There's a portfolio in his private study detailing the investments. They were quite successful, eventually. Vincent was stunned. His father had always been contemptuous of trade, considering it beneath the dignity of the aristocracy. "I'd like to see this portfolio." "Of course, I can retrieve it for you." As she rose to leave, Vincent found himself saying, "Join me for dinner tonight, Miss Astor." Amelia paused, clearly startled by the invitation. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Your Grace." "You dined with my father regularly, did you not?" "Yes, but circumstances were different. He was elderly, in declining health. There was no impropriety in our sharing meals." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Are you concerned for your reputation, Miss Astor, or for mine?" "Both," she answered honestly. A young unmarried woman dining privately with the Duke would invite speculation, regardless of the innocent nature of the conversation. "There are no witnesses at Havenswood save the servants, who answer to me." "Servants talk, Your Grace, especially when they observe behavior that contradicts social norms." She was right, of course. It was an improper request, one that could potentially damage her reputation if it became known. Yet Vincent found himself unreasonably irritated by her refusal. "Very well. Bring the portfolio to my study after you've dined." He turned back to his correspondence, effectively dismissing her. Later, when she knocked at his study door, Vincent had regained his composure. He accepted the portfolio with appropriate formality, thanking her for her assistance. As he reviewed the documents, he was astonished by his father's financial acumen. The old Duke had indeed invested in several manufacturing concerns, primarily in the Midlands, but had done so through a series of holding companies that obscured his direct involvement. The returns had been substantial, explaining how the estate had maintained its prosperity despite the agricultural depression that had affected many landed families. "This is remarkable," Vincent admitted, looking up to find Amelia still standing by the door. "I had no idea my father possessed such business instincts." "He was more adaptable than people realized," she said. "He understood that the world was changing, that land alone could no longer support the aristocracy's way of life." "Did you advise him on these investments?" She shook her head. "No, I merely organized his papers and corresponded with his agents. The strategy was entirely his." Vincent leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "You're being modest, Miss Astor. My father was many things, but he was not known for his innovative thinking. Someone influenced this change in approach." A slight flush colored her cheeks. "I may have shared some observations about industrial development based on my father's experiences. He was an engineer before his death." "An engineer?" This was new information. "I assumed, given your position as a governess, that you came from genteel but reduced circumstances." "That's accurate. My father was well educated, but not wealthy. When he died, I had to support myself." She clasped her hands before her, a gesture Vincent had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "If there's nothing else, Your Grace, I should retire." "It's growing late." Vincent sensed she was withholding something, a pattern he had noticed increasingly in their conversations. Whenever the topic turned personal, Amelia became reticent, redirecting the discussion or finding reasons to excuse herself. "Actually, there is something else," he said. "I've been reviewing my father's journal more thoroughly." She stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I believe I expressed my opinion about that, Your Grace." "Yes, you did. Nevertheless, I've continued reading." He rose from his desk, moving to stand before her. "He mentions a promise you made to him before his death, a promise concerning me." Amelia's gaze dropped to the floor. "Your Grace." "I want to know what it was," Vincent insisted. "What did my father ask of you? And why have you remained at Havenswood all these years, hidden away in his private chambers, maintaining a library no one visits?" When she looked up, her expression was pained but resolute. "He asked me to watch over you in whatever limited way I could, to preserve certain truths until you were ready to hear them, and to protect Havenswood until you returned to claim it properly." "Protect it from what?" "From being sold out of grief or anger," she said quietly. "He feared you would dispose of it without understanding its true value, not financial but personal." Vincent felt a surge of indignation. My father had no right to appoint a guardian over my decisions, least of all a stranger. No, he didn't, she agreed, surprising him. It was presumptuous and unfair to both of us, but he was dying, filled with regrets and desperate to make some amends. I agreed because, she hesitated, because I believed you deserved to know the truth about him someday. Not the version of him you knew as a child, nor the version society saw, but the complete man, with all his flaws and virtues. Vincent studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or deceit, and finding none. And what is this truth you've been protecting? What great secret did my father entrust to you? Amelia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. That he loved you desperately and imperfectly. That his inability to show that love was his greatest regret. And that everything he did in his final years, including appointing me to care for Havenswood, was an attempt to preserve something for you that he believed you would someday value. Vincent turned away, unable to bear the earnestness in her gaze. A convenient sentiment for a man to express when he's no longer required to demonstrate it. Yes, she agreed, her voice gentle. It was cowardly of him not to tell you himself. But the sentiment was genuine, nonetheless. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Vincent stared at the portfolio on his desk, evidence of a father he had never known, one who had planned carefully for the future, who had adapted to changing times, who had perhaps cared more than he had ever shown. "Thank you for your candor, Miss Astor," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "You've fulfilled whatever obligation you felt toward my father. Consider yourself released from any promises made to him." He could feel her hesitation behind him, sensed there was more she wished to say. "Good night, Your Grace," she said instead, and quietly left the room. Vincent remained in his study long after she had gone, the house settling into silence around him. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and unfamiliar. The next morning brought clear skies and a letter that changed everything. Vincent was breaking his fast in the morning room when Harrison presented the correspondence that had arrived with the post rider. Among the business letters was one bearing the seal of Winters and Sons, his father's former solicitors. Vincent opened it with mild curiosity, assuming it was some administrative matter related to the estate. The contents left him speechless. "Harrison," he called, his voice sharper than intended, "where is Miss Astor this morning?" "In the rose garden, Your Grace. She rises early to tend to the flowers before beginning her library duties." Vincent strode through the house and out onto the terrace, the letter clutched in his hand. The morning air was cool and fresh after the long rain, the gardens glistening with droplets that sparkled in the early light. He spotted Amelia kneeling beside a rose bush, pruning shears in hand, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. She looked up at his approach, her expression changing from peaceful to wary as she registered his agitation. "Your Grace," she said, rising quickly and brushing soil from her skirts, "is something wrong?" Vincent held up the letter. "I've received a most interesting communication from Mr. Winters. It seems that upon hearing of my intention to sell Havenswood, he felt compelled to send me certain documents that were to be delivered only in such an eventuality." Amelia's face paled. "I see. Do you? Because I find myself utterly bewildered." Vincent's voice was dangerously quiet. "These documents suggest that my father established a trust for the maintenance of Havenswood Manor and its library. A trust that names you, Amelia Astor, as its primary executor, with an annual income to support both the estate and yourself for the remainder of your life." She removed her gardening gloves slowly. "Yes, that is correct. Furthermore," Vincent continued, "the trust stipulates that while I retain ownership of Havenswood, I cannot sell it without your explicit consent as co-trustee. A rather extraordinary legal arrangement that effectively gives you control over my ancestral home." "Not control," she corrected gently. "Protection. The trust was designed to prevent a hasty decision, not to usurp your authority. You can still sell Havenswood, but only after a period of 2 years in residence, and only with my agreement that the sale serves the best interests of the estate and the collection." Vincent stared at her, incredulous. "And you didn't think to mention this minor detail, when I announced my intention to sell. I was hoping it wouldn't be necessary, she admitted. I hoped that once you spent time at Havenswood, you might reconsider. So all this, your helpful insights about my father, your careful management of the library, your convenient presence whenever I had questions, it was all a calculated effort to manipulate me into keeping an estate I have no desire to maintain. Hurt flashed across her face. No, Your Grace. My service to Havenswood and my respect for your father's wishes have been genuine. If I've been selective in what I've shared with you, it was only because I believed some truths required the right moment. Vincent laughed bitterly. The right moment, like when I'm contractually trapped into remaining at an estate I've spent my adult life avoiding. Tell me, Miss Astor, what else have you deemed me not ready to hear? She looked away, her profile tense against the backdrop of roses. Many things, Your Grace, but perhaps the most important is why your father created the trust in the first place. Enlighten me. Amelia turned back to face him, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for battle. Your father believed that Havenswood was more than a property, it was the physical embodiment of the Fallsworth legacy. He feared that in your justified anger toward him, you might discard that legacy without fully understanding its value. And he appointed you, a paid companion with no connection to the Fallsworth family, to ensure I didn't squander my inheritance. Vincent's tone was scathing. How remarkably presumptuous, even for my father. He appointed me because I understood what Havenswood meant to him, she replied evenly, and because he believed I could help you see it too, if given time. Why you? Vincent demanded, stepping closer. Out of all the people in his life, why entrust something of this magnitude to a former governess he had known for only a few years? A complicated emotion crossed Amelia's face, fear, resignation, and something like resolve. Because I was not merely his companion, Your Grace, I was his wife. The words landed like a physical blow. Vincent stared at her, certain he had misheard. What did you say? Your father and I were married in a private ceremony 3 months before his death, she said quietly. It was not a love match in the traditional sense. He was dying and concerned about my future after his passing. The marriage provided me with security and him with peace of mind that Havenswood would be cared for. Vincent felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. You're claiming to be the Dowager Duchess of Fallsworth. No, she said quickly. The marriage was kept secret at your father's insistence. He didn't wish to create a scandal that might reflect poorly on you when you assumed the title. Legally, I am his widow, but I have never claimed the title or privileges that would normally accompany it. And yet you claimed the authority to prevent me from selling my own estate, Vincent said coldly. How convenient that this marriage remained secret until it served your purpose. Amelia's composure finally cracked, pain evident in her eyes. Do you truly believe I would fabricate something like this, Mr. Winters has the marriage certificate. It was witnessed by the vicar of Havenswood village and the estate steward. Your father's will, the complete version, not the redacted one you received, acknowledges me as his wife and provides for my future. Vincent turned away, struggling to process this revelation. His father, who had mourned his mother for decades, had remarried in the final months of his life to a woman young enough to be his daughter. It seemed impossible, yet it explained so much. Amelia's intimate knowledge of his father's thoughts, her presence in his private chambers, her authority over the estate. If what you say is true, he said finally, then you've been deceiving me since the moment I arrived at Havenswood. I never lied to you, Your Grace, she said softly. I simply didn't volunteer information you weren't ready to receive. Not ready? Vincent whirled back to face her, anger finally breaking through his shock. Who are you to decide what I am ready for? You're a stranger who inserted herself into my family through means I can only speculate about. The accusation hung between them, ugly and explicit. Amelia flinched as if he had struck her. You believe I married your father for personal gain, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That I manipulated a dying man for his fortune and position. Why else would a young woman marry a man old enough to be her grandfather? A man known for his difficult temperament and solitary habits. Amelia's gaze met his, steady despite the tears that threatened. Because he asked me to, because he was afraid of dying alone. Because in the years I had known him, I had come to care for him deeply, not as a lover, but as a friend who understood his regrets and his hopes. It was a marriage of companionship, nothing more. Her words held the ring of truth, but Vincent was too shaken to acknowledge it. The revelation had upended everything he thought he knew about his father's final years, and about the woman who had been gradually working her way under his guard. "I need to verify these claims," he said stiffly. "Until then, I would appreciate if you would confine yourself to the library. I find I require some distance to consider the implications of what you've told me." Amelia nodded once, dignity intact despite the hurt evident in her eyes. "Of course, Your Grace. I understand." As she walked past him toward the house, Vincent noticed, for the first time, how young she truly was, perhaps no more than 25. Far too young to have willingly bound herself to a dying old man without some ulterior motive. Yet he couldn't reconcile that cynical assessment with the woman he had come to know over the past weeks, intelligent, principled, and seemingly genuine in her care for Havenswood and its legacy. For the first time since arriving at the estate, Vincent felt truly lost. The father he thought he knew, cold, distant, immovable, had been replaced by a more complex figure. A man who made unconventional investments, who treasured his son's achievements in secret, who married his companion to ensure both her future and the preservation of his estate. And at the center of it all stood Amelia Astor, or rather, Amelia Fallsworth, a woman who had dedicated years of her life to honoring promises made to a man most had found impossible to love. Vincent returned to the house, determined to uncover the full truth, however uncomfortable it might prove to be. The verification came swiftly. By afternoon, Vincent had dispatched riders to both Mr. Winters and the vicar of Havenswood village. By evening, he had confirmation from both. The marriage had indeed taken place, legal in every respect, conducted with proper license and witnesses. Further inquiry revealed that the Dowager Duchess, for that was indeed her rightful title, had declined to publicly claim her position out of respect for the late Duke's wishes and concern for how it might affect his heir's standing in society. She had lived quietly at Havenswood, drawing only the modest stipend established in the trust, rather than the substantial widow's portion she was entitled to. Vincent sat alone in his father's study, a glass of brandy untouched before him, contemplating these revelations. The woman he had discovered in the North Wing, whom he had treated as little better than a trespasser, was in fact his father's widow and the legal co-trustee of Havenswood. She had every right to be there, more right perhaps than he himself had, having abandoned the estate for 5 years. As night fell, he found himself once again drawn to the library. Amelia was there, as he had expected, working by candlelight at her usual table. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. "Your Grace," she acknowledged him quietly. "I believe, under the circumstances, such formality is unnecessary between us," Vincent said, taking the seat across from her. "You are, after all, my father's widow, the Dowager Duchess of Fallsworth." She shook her head. "I never used the title. I never wanted it. The marriage was an arrangement of friendship and practical necessity, not an attempt to elevate my position." "So you've said. Yet you accepted the role of protector of Havenswood, a responsibility typically reserved for family." "Yes," she met his gaze without apology. "Because your father asked it of me, and because I believed in the importance of what I was protecting." Vincent studied her face in the candlelight, seeing now what he had missed before, the quiet determination that must have sustained her through years of solitude, maintaining a legacy for a man who never acknowledged her existence. "Why did you remain hidden all these years?" he asked. "You could have written to me, explained the situation, claimed your rightful place." "Would you have believed me?" she asked simply. "A stranger claiming to be your father's secret bride, demanding recognition. At best, you would have dismissed me as an opportunist. At worst, you might have challenged the marriage legally, creating precisely the scandal your father wished to avoid." She was right, of course. He would have reacted exactly as she described, with suspicion and likely hostility. So instead, you remained in the shadows, maintaining Havenswood while I built my life in London, unaware of your existence. Yes, it wasn't ideal, but it honored your father's wishes while preserving what he valued most. Vincent leaned forward, studying her with newfound curiosity. And what was that exactly? What did my father value most, in your estimation? Amelia's expression softened, her guard lowering slightly. Family legacy, not in the superficial sense of titles and possessions, but in the deeper meaning of connection across generations. He regretted deeply his failure to build that connection with you. Yet he made no attempt to repair our relationship while he lived. He believed it was too late, she said gently, that he had damaged your trust beyond recovery. In his final years, his focus shifted to preserving what he could of the Fallsworth heritage, hoping that someday you might return to claim it on your own terms. Vincent found it difficult to reconcile this portrait of his father with the man he had known, yet the evidence of his father's changed perspective was everywhere at Havenswood. From the carefully maintained library to the financial portfolio that had secured the estate's future. You fulfilled your obligation admirably, Vincent said after a moment. But the question remains, what happens now? You are legally entitled to remain at Havenswood for life, with control over any potential sale. Yet I am the Duke of Fallsworth, with responsibilities that keep me primarily in London. Amelia's hands stilled on the ledger before her. What would you like to happen, Your Grace? The question was deceptively simple, yet Vincent found himself unsure of the answer. When he had arrived at Havenswood, his intention had been clear: sell the estate, sever the last tie to his painful childhood, and return to his ordered life in London. Now that certainty had eroded, replaced by conflicting impulses he couldn't quite name. I don't know, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Havenswood has always represented everything I wished to escape. Yet these past weeks have shown me aspects of the estate, and of my father, that I never knew existed. Amelia's expression softened. Perhaps that's your answer, then, not to decide immediately, but to allow yourself time to discover what Havenswood truly means to you beyond the shadows of your childhood. And you would remain here during this discovery period, if you wish it, or I could remove to the dower house on the far side of the estate. It's small but comfortable and would provide an appropriate distance. Vincent considered the offer. The proper solution would indeed be for Amelia to occupy the dower house, maintaining her role as co-trustee while creating a respectable separation between them. Yet the thought of her absence from the main house left him strangely unsettled. That won't be necessary, he heard himself say. Havenswood is large enough for both of us to maintain appropriate boundaries while I determine its future. Relief flickered across her face, quickly masked. As you wish, Your Grace. Vincent, he corrected. If we are to share this house peacefully, we should at least dispense with unnecessary formality. Vincent, she repeated, his name sounding different in her voice, softer, more personal. And you should call me Amelia. Amelia, he agreed, finding that he liked the shape of it on his tongue. I believe this arrangement may prove educational for us both. A small smile touched her lips. I hope so. As he left the library that night, Vincent felt something shift within him, a loosening of the rigid certainty that had defined his adult life. Havenswood, which had for so long represented only painful memories, now contained something unexpected, the possibility of rediscovery, not only of his family's legacy, but perhaps of himself as well. And at the center of that possibility stood Amelia, a woman whose connection to his family was as unlikely as it was undeniable, a connection that challenged everything he thought he knew about his father, about Havenswood, and about the boundaries he had built around his own heart. Summer settled over Havenswood, transforming the estate with vibrant life. The gardens bloomed in riotous color, the woods filled with birdsong, and the lake glittered like polished silver in the long evening light. Vincent, who had intended to stay only long enough to arrange the sale, found himself postponing his return to London repeatedly. He told himself it was necessary to properly assess the estate's value, to review the extensive collections, to understand the full scope of his inheritance before making any irreversible decisions. But in truth, he found himself increasingly drawn to the rhythms of country life, and to the woman who moved through Havenswood with quiet authority. Amelia proved to be far more than merely his father's widow or the estate's librarian. As the weeks passed, Vincent discovered her influence extended throughout Havenswood. The gardens flourished under her direction, the tenants respected her judgment on agricultural matters, and even the servants looked to her for guidance on household concerns. "You've essentially been running Havenswood single-handedly for 5 years," Vincent observed one morning as they walked through the rose garden, now in full bloom. Amelia shrugged modestly. "I've merely maintained what was already established. Your father had excellent systems in place. My father barely left his study during my childhood. He had little interest in the practical management of the estate. He changed in his later years," she said, carefully deadheading a fading blossom. "Illness has a way of clarifying what matters. He became quite invested in Havenswood's future." Vincent watched her hands move among the roses, confident, capable hands that had preserved his inheritance when he had abandoned it. "Why did you agree to marry him? The truth, Amelia, not what you think I wish to hear." She straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "Because he was dying alone, filled with regrets, and I could offer him some comfort in his final months. Because he had been kind to me when I had nothing, and because he promised that in exchange for my companionship, he would ensure I never again faced the uncertainty that had defined my early life." "It was a transaction then," Vincent said, not accusatory but seeking to understand. "In part," she acknowledged, "but not entirely. Over the years I served as his companion, I developed a genuine affection for him, not romantic love, but a deep caring. He was brilliant, difficult, often unkind, but also capable of surprising gentleness." Vincent struggled to reconcile this description with the father he had known. "He was never gentle with me." Amelia's expression softened with compassion. "No, and that was his greatest regret. He believed his harshness had been necessary to prepare you for your responsibilities, but in his final years, he recognized how deeply he had failed you." They continued walking in silence, the scent of roses heavy in the warm air. Vincent found himself increasingly curious about the woman beside him, not just her relationship with his father, but her life before Havenswood, the experiences that had shaped her. "Tell me about your family," he said, as they reached the stone bench overlooking the lake. "You mentioned your father was an engineer." Amelia sat, arranging her skirts with unconscious grace. "Yes, he designed railway bridges primarily. Quite innovative work, but poorly compensated during his lifetime. My mother died when I was 12, and father raised me alone until his death when I was 17. And then you became a governess." "I had few options. My education was excellent. Father believed in educating daughters as thoroughly as sons, but I had no connections, no dowry, nothing that would secure a suitable marriage." She smiled faintly. "Teaching was the respectable choice for a woman of my background." "How did you come to meet my father?" "At Thornfield Hall, as I told you. He visited Lord Thornfield's library regularly to consult certain rare volumes. We encountered each other there several times. He was not kind initially." Vincent could well imagine his father's disdain for a mere governess. "Yet you eventually became his companion." "Yes. Lord Thornfield's heir returned from university and took an inappropriate interest in me. When I rejected his advances, I was dismissed without references. Your father happened to witness the scene and offered me a position cataloguing his library." She shrugged. "It was an unexpected kindness from a man not known for charity." Vincent found himself suddenly, irrationally angry at the unnamed heir who had forced Amelia from her position, and unexpectedly grateful to his father for his intervention. "And from librarian to companion to wife," he observed, "a remarkable progression." Amelia met his gaze steadily. "I know how it must appear. The young woman of no family, insinuating herself into the confidence of a wealthy, dying duke. If I were in your position, I would be suspicious too. Yet you made no claim to my father's fortune after his death. You've lived modestly, drawing only the stipend established for the library's maintenance." "I never wanted his money or his title," she said simply. "I accepted the marriage, because it gave him peace and me security to remain at Havenswood, which had become my home. Vincent believed her. Despite his initial suspicions, he had found no evidence of calculation or deceit in Amelia's character during their weeks together. She was forthright, principled, and genuinely devoted to Havenswood, qualities that had begun to stir his admiration, and perhaps something deeper he wasn't yet ready to examine. Havenswood has flourished under your care, he acknowledged. Whatever your arrangement with my father, the estate has benefited from it. Thank you, she said, a genuine smile warming her features. That means a great deal, coming from you. As they walked back to the house, Vincent found himself noticing things he had overlooked before: the graceful curve of Amelia's neck, the way sunlight caught in her copper hair, the quiet confidence of her movements. She was not conventionally beautiful, yet there was something compelling about her presence that drew his attention increasingly. It was a troubling realization. Amelia was his father's widow, a connection that should have placed her firmly beyond the realm of appropriate interest. Yet Vincent could not deny the growing awareness between them, an undercurrent of mutual curiosity and attraction that defied simple categorization. That evening, as they sat in the library after dinner, a habit they had fallen into despite its impropriety, Vincent found himself studying Amelia over the edge of his book. She was absorbed in her cataloguing, a small furrow of concentration between her brows, seemingly unaware of his attention. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked abruptly. She looked up, startled. "Regret what?" "Binding yourself to Havenswood, to my father's legacy. You're young, Amelia. You could have built a different life after his death, remarried, had a family of your own." She set down her pen, considering the question seriously. "I don't regret the choice I made. Havenswood gave me purpose when I had none, security when I had known only uncertainty. As for marriage and family," she hesitated. "Those possibilities seemed remote for someone of my position." "But not impossible," Vincent pressed, unsure why her answer mattered to him so much. "You're the Dowager Duchess of Fallsworth, however quietly you've held the title. Many men would overlook your origins for such a connection." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I've never been interested in a marriage of convenience or calculation. Having experienced one such arrangement, however benevolent, I would not seek another." "What would you seek, then? If circumstances were different?" Amelia's gaze met his, startlingly direct. "A partnership of equals, mutual respect, companionship in its truest sense, perhaps even love, though that seems a luxury few are granted." The candlelight caught the gold flecks in her green eyes, and Vincent found himself unable to look away. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition neither was ready to acknowledge. "A worthy aspiration," he said finally, breaking the tension. "Though, as you say, circumstances rarely align to permit such ideals." Amelia smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I've found that circumstances can change in the most unexpected ways." As she gathered her papers to retire for the evening, Vincent remained in the library, troubled by the direction of his thoughts. He had come to Havenswood to sever his connection to the past, to free himself from the shadow of his father's influence. Instead, he found himself increasingly entangled in the legacy his father had left behind, not just the estate itself, but the woman who had been entrusted with its preservation. Amelia Astor Fallsworth, the secret duchess, who challenged his assumptions and awakened feelings he had long believed himself incapable of experiencing. A woman who, by all social conventions and moral standards, should have remained firmly beyond the realm of personal interest. Yet as Vincent stared into the dying embers of the library fire, he could no longer deny the truth. Amelia had become far more than his father's widow or Havenswood's guardian. She had become essential to his understanding not only of his inheritance, but of himself, a realization as unsettling as it was undeniable. August brought a heat wave that transformed Havenswood into a languid paradise of heavy blooms and golden afternoons. The pace of life slowed, with even the most industrious servants seeking shade during the hottest hours. Vincent found himself rising early to handle estate business, retreating to the cool interior of the house by midday, and emerging again in the long evenings to walk the grounds as the heat relented. It was during one such evening walk that he discovered Amelia's secret refuge. He had followed a narrow path through the woods beyond the formal gardens, seeking the breeze that sometimes moved through the trees. The path wound deeper than he had expected, eventually opening onto a small clearing dominated by a stone cottage he had never seen before. It was an ancient structure, predating the main house by at least a century, with walls of weathered grey stone and a thatched roof that had been recently repaired. Wildflowers grew in profusion around its perimeter, and a small vegetable garden thrived to one side. As Vincent approached, the door opened, and Amelia emerged, dressed more simply than he had ever seen her, a light cotton dress with her hair loosely braided over one shoulder. She carried a basket of freshly cut herbs and stopped abruptly when she saw him. "Vincent," she said, surprise evident in her voice, "I didn't expect anyone to find this place." "I was walking to escape the heat," he explained, looking past her to the cottage interior visible through the open door. "What is this place? I don't recall it on any estate maps." "It's called the Hermit's Cottage," she said, relaxing slightly. "It doesn't appear on modern maps because it was abandoned for decades. Your father rediscovered it about 6 years ago and had it restored." "And you use it now?" She nodded, "as a retreat occasionally. When I need solitude or a change of scenery." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to see inside?" The invitation felt strangely intimate, as if she were showing him something personal. "If I'm not intruding." "Not at all." She led the way into the cottage. The interior was simple but charming, a single room with a small hearth, a wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with books, and a narrow bed tucked into an alcove. Bunches of herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with mingled fragrances of lavender, rosemary, and mint. "It's lovely," Vincent said, genuinely impressed by the cottage's rustic charm. "Peaceful. That's why I come here," Amelia said, setting her basket on the table. "Havenswood is magnificent, but sometimes I need something simpler." She gestured to the herbs. "I grow medicinal plants here, old remedies my mother taught me. The villagers sometimes come for tinctures and salves." Vincent looked at her with newfound curiosity. "You're a healer as well as a librarian." "Hardly a healer," she laughed. "Just someone with a bit of knowledge about traditional remedies. It gives me pleasure to be useful." Vincent moved to the bookshelf, examining the volumes, a curious mix of botanical texts, poetry, and novels. "These aren't from the Fallsworth collection." "No, they're mine, books I've collected over the years," she smiled. "A modest library but precious to me." Vincent selected a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, noting the worn binding that suggested frequent reading. "You prefer the romantics." "I appreciate their reverence for nature and emotion," she said, moving to prepare tea on the small stove, "though I find Austen's clear-eyed view of society equally compelling." As she worked, Vincent was struck by the domesticity of the scene, Amelia moving with easy familiarity through the cottage, preparing tea as if they were simply a man and woman sharing a quiet evening, unburdened by the complexities of their actual relationship. "Does it bother you?" he asked suddenly. She looked up from the kettle. "Does what bother me?" "Living in the shadow of my father's legacy, being defined by your connection to him rather than by your own identity." Amelia considered the question as she poured boiling water into a teapot. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but we're all shaped by our connections to others, aren't we? You've spent your life defined in relation to your father as well, first as his son, then as his heir, now as his successor." "I've spent my life trying to escape that definition," Vincent said. "To establish myself as something separate from him." "And have you succeeded?" The question was gentle but penetrating. Vincent accepted the cup of tea she offered, buying time to consider his answer. "I believed I had," he said finally. "In London, among people who knew me only as the Duke of Fallsworth, not as my father's son, I thought I had created an independent identity. But returning to Havenswood has shown me how much of my life has been shaped by reaction against him, rather than true independence." Amelia sat across from him, cradling her own cup. "That's a powerful insight." "An uncomfortable one," he acknowledged. "I've built my life on the foundation of not being my father, not drinking to excess, not retreating from society, not allowing emotion to guide my decisions. But in rejecting everything he was, I've been just as controlled by his influence as if I had emulated him." "And now," she asked quietly. Vincent met her gaze over the rim of his cup. "Now I find myself wondering who I might be if I stopped defining myself in opposition to him. If I allowed myself to consider Havenswood not as his prison, but as my inheritance, to be shaped according to my own vision." Something like hope flickered in Amelia's eyes. "Havenswood could be whatever you wish it to be. It has been many things over the centuries: a fortress, a sanctuary, a prison, a home. Its nature changes with each generation that claims it." "And what has it been for you?" Vincent asked. "A haven," she answered simply. "True to its name. When I had nowhere else to belong, Havenswood offered me purpose and peace." The evening light slanted through the cottage windows, gilding Amelia's copper hair and illuminating her face with a soft radiance that caught Vincent's breath. In that moment, away from the grandeur of the main house and the weight of their complicated history, he saw her not as his father's widow or Havenswood's guardian, but simply as a woman of remarkable intelligence and quiet strength. A woman he was growing increasingly unable to imagine Havenswood without. They finished their tea in comfortable silence as twilight deepened outside the cottage windows. When it came time to return to the main house, Vincent found himself reluctant to leave the simple intimacy they had shared. "Thank you for showing me your retreat," he said, as they walked back through the woods, fireflies beginning to dance among the trees. "It helps me understand you better." "I'm glad," she said. "Few people have seen it. Your father knew of it, of course, but he never visited. He said it was my place alone." A rare consideration from him. "He could be surprisingly thoughtful in unexpected ways," she said. Another side of him few were privileged to see. As they approached the house, its windows glowing with lamplight against the darkening sky, Vincent felt the weight of convention settling back upon them. Within those walls, they would resume their careful roles, the Duke and his father's widow maintaining appropriate distance despite the growing connection between them. "Would you join me for a ride tomorrow morning?" he asked impulsively. "There are parts of the estate I haven't visited since childhood. I'd value your knowledge of how they've changed." Surprise and pleasure crossed Amelia's face. "I'd like that very much, though I should warn you I'm an indifferent horsewoman. Your father never encouraged me to ride." "We'll select a gentle mount for you," Vincent promised, "and take our time." As they parted in the entrance hall, Vincent was acutely aware of the servants' discreet observation. Their daily interactions had not gone unnoticed by the household staff, and he had no doubt that speculation was rife below stairs about the nature of his relationship with the Dowager Duchess. Yet for the first time in his adult life, Vincent found himself unconcerned with others' perceptions. The connection he was forming with Amelia felt too significant to be bounded by conventional expectations or propriety's rigid demands. That night, as he prepared for bed, Vincent caught sight of his reflection in the mirror and was startled by what he saw, not the controlled, detached Duke who had arrived at Havenswood with the single-minded purpose of selling it, but a man whose face showed evidence of emotions he had long denied himself. Curiosity, uncertainty, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Havenswood was changing him, he realized. Or perhaps more accurately, Amelia was changing him, challenging his certainties, awakening dormant feelings, offering a vision of life that incorporated the past without being imprisoned by it. The realization should have alarmed him. Instead, Vincent found himself anticipating the morning with an eagerness he hadn't felt in years. The simple prospect of Amelia's company transforming a routine ride into something he awaited with barely contained impatience. Sleep came slowly that night, his thoughts filled with copper hair illuminated by evening light, green eyes that saw too much, and the possibility that perhaps his father's final gift had not been Havenswood itself, but the woman he had entrusted with its care. Their morning ride became a daily ritual, expanding Vincent's reacquaintance with his ancestral lands and deepening his understanding of Amelia. She might have been an indifferent horsewoman by aristocratic standards, but she rode with the same quiet confidence she brought to all her endeavors, and her knowledge of the estate proved comprehensive. "The tenant farms are thriving," Vincent observed as they rode past neatly maintained cottages and well-tended fields. "Better than I remember from my youth." Your father implemented new farming methods in his final years, Amelia explained. Crop rotation, improved drainage, better terms for the tenants. The estate's agricultural income has increased by nearly 30% as a result. Vincent was impressed despite himself. Another unexpected initiative from a man I thought incapable of change. He changed greatly in his final years, Amelia said. Facing mortality has that effect, I believe. Priorities shift. Legacy becomes more important than pride. They rode in companionable silence for a while, following a stream that wound through a meadow bright with late summer wildflowers. Vincent found himself increasingly comfortable in Amelia's company, their conversations flowing easily from estate matters to literature to philosophical questions that revealed the depth of her education and intelligence. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, as they allowed their horses to drink from the stream, "how you came to be so knowledgeable about library science and archival methods. You mentioned your father educated you well, but such specialized knowledge is unusual." Amelia smiled, adjusting her riding hat. "My father was a member of the Royal Society despite his modest means. Our home was filled with books and visiting scholars. I absorbed much simply by listening and observing. Later, when I began organizing your father's library, I studied the subject more formally through correspondence with several university librarians." "Self-taught then." "Necessity is a thorough teacher," she said without self-pity. "When one must make one's way in the world, one acquires whatever knowledge is required." Vincent studied her profile against the backdrop of rolling hills and distant woodlands. "You've never spoken of your time as a governess. Was it very difficult?" A shadow crossed her face. "Not difficult so much as constraining, to be perpetually in a household yet never of it, to be responsible for children's development yet have no authority, to be educated yet treated as barely above a servant." She shook her head. "It's a curious limbo that governesses inhabit. And my father rescued you from this limbo." "He offered an alternative," she corrected. "One that utilized my skills and education more fully. The fact that it also provided security was a significant consideration for a woman with no family connections." Vincent guided his horse back to the path, Amelia following beside him. "You speak so practically about decisions that shaped your entire life. Were there never moments of rebellion, of wanting something more than security?" She laughed, the sound bright in the summer air. "Of course. I dreamed wild dreams as a girl, of travel and adventure, of making scientific discoveries, of falling madly in love. But life has a way of narrowing possibilities, especially for women without fortune or family." "And now, do you still dream, Amelia?" The question was more intimate than he had intended, and he saw her cheeks color slightly. "I've learned to find adventure in smaller things," she said after a moment. "In books, in the changing seasons, in cultivating a garden and watching it bloom." She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "But yes, I still dream." Hope seems to be an irrepressible human quality. Vincent wanted to ask what she hoped for now, what dreams sustained her in her quiet life at Havenswood, but something in her expression warned him that such a question might venture into territory neither was prepared to explore. Instead, he guided their conversation to safer ground, discussing plans for the harvest festival that the estate traditionally hosted for tenants and villagers. Amelia had maintained the tradition during his absence, and her suggestions for this year's celebration revealed both practical management skills and genuine care for the community's well-being. As they rode back toward the house, Vincent realized how completely his perception of Havenswood had shifted during his weeks in residence. What had once seemed a burden to be discarded had gradually transformed into a living entity with its own rhythms and relationships, a community he was increasingly reluctant to abandon. And at the center of that transformation stood Amelia, whose quiet dedication had preserved not just buildings and books, but the spirit of place that made Havenswood more than merely an estate. That evening, a telegram arrived from London that forced Vincent to confront the realities he had been increasingly setting aside. "Business requires your attention?" Amelia asked, noticing his frown as he read the message over dinner. "Yes." My solicitor reports several matters that cannot be handled by correspondence alone. Vincent folded the telegram, setting it aside. It appears I must return to London, at least temporarily. Of course, when will you leave? Tomorrow, if the weather permits. I anticipate being absent for perhaps a fortnight. Amelia nodded, her expression carefully neutral. I'll ensure everything continues smoothly in your absence. I've no doubt of that, Vincent said, studying her face across the table. You managed Havenswood for 5 years without my intervention. A fortnight should hardly present a challenge. Will you, she hesitated, will you be returning afterward, or do you anticipate remaining in London? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had yet acknowledged directly. Vincent found himself genuinely uncertain of the answer. I had intended to remain in London once the sale of Havenswood was arranged, he said slowly, but circumstances have evolved since my arrival here. In what way? She asked, her voice carefully even. Vincent considered how to express the profound shift in his perspective without revealing too much of the emotional undercurrent that accompanied it. I find Havenswood is not the burden I believed it to be, he said finally. Its potential has become more apparent with time, and its guardianship has proven far more capable than I anticipated. A faint smile touched Amelia's lips. High praise indeed, Your Grace. Vincent, he corrected automatically, pleased when her smile deepened. Vincent, she echoed. Then I shall expect your return in a fortnight and maintain everything to your satisfaction until then. Later, as they sat in the library, a habit neither seemed willing to abandon despite its growing impropriety, Vincent found himself reluctant to contemplate the separation ahead. The thought of London's noise and pace, its social obligations and political entanglements, held little appeal compared to the quiet evenings he had come to cherish at Havenswood. Perhaps you might accompany me to London, he suggested impulsively. Amelia looked up from her book startled. To London? Why not? You haven't left Havenswood in years, by your own admission. Surely a change of scenery would be welcome. She closed her book, considering the offer. It's a kind thought, but I'm not certain it would be appropriate. You're the Dowager Duchess, Vincent pointed out. Your presence in the ducal residence would be entirely proper. In legal terms, perhaps, but in practical ones, she hesitated. Our situation is unusual, Vincent. Society would not know how to categorize me. Your father's widow, yes, but also a woman of no family or fortune who married a man old enough to be her grandfather mere months before his death. The speculation would be immediate and unkind. She was right, of course. London society would seize upon their situation with voracious curiosity, inventing scandalous explanations for both the original marriage and their current living arrangements. Amelia would be subjected to scrutiny and judgment she had thus far been spared through her seclusion at Havenswood. Perhaps in the future then, Vincent said, hiding his disappointment, when circumstances are clearer. Amelia's gaze met his, a question in her eyes that neither was ready to articulate. Perhaps. The following morning, as Vincent's carriage was prepared for departure, Amelia presented him with a small package wrapped in brown paper. For your journey, she explained. A few items from the cottage that might prove useful if you encounter fatigue or difficulty sleeping in London. Vincent unwrapped the package to find several small cloth bags containing dried herbs, each neatly labeled in Amelia's precise handwriting. For headache, for restful sleep, for mental clarity. These are remarkable, he said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you. They're simple remedies, she said modestly. But effective. As the carriage was brought around, Vincent found himself unexpectedly reluctant to depart. The prospect of leaving Havenswood, of leaving Amelia, filled him with a disquiet he had not anticipated when he had first arrived at the estate. I will return as soon as my business is concluded, he promised as they stood at the entrance, the morning sun casting long shadows across the gravel drive. Havenswood will be here waiting, Amelia said quietly. Vincent held her gaze, understanding the words she hadn't spoken. Yes, I believe it will. As the carriage pulled away, Vincent looked back to see Amelia standing on the steps of Havenswood, her copper hair catching the sunlight, her figure growing smaller with distance, yet remaining somehow central to his thoughts. It was only as the carriage turned onto the main road, Havenswood disappearing behind a screen of ancient oaks, that Vincent acknowledged the truth he had been gradually recognizing over the past weeks. He was falling in love with his father's widow, a circumstance so complex and potentially scandalous that he had no idea how to navigate it. London, with its distance and distractions, might provide clarity, or it might simply confirm what he already suspected. That Amelia had become essential not just to Havenswood, but to his own sense of home. London enveloped Vincent in its familiar rhythms, the ceaseless noise, the relentless social obligations, the complex business affairs that had once consumed his attention entirely. He moved through his appointments efficiently, addressing the matters that had required his presence while declining most of the social invitations that accompanied them. His townhouse, once a refuge of ordered solitude, now felt strangely empty. The evenings stretched before him without the quiet companionship he had grown accustomed to at Havenswood, without Amelia's thoughtful conversation and subtle humor to enliven the hours. He found himself using her herbal remedies more frequently than he had expected, the sachet for mental clarity during particularly complex negotiations, the one for restful sleep when he found himself lying awake, thinking of green eyes and copper hair in candlelight. A week into his stay, Vincent encountered Lord Thornfield at his club, the very man whose library had first brought Amelia into contact with his father. "Fallsworth. Heard you've finally taken up residence at the old family seat," Thornfield said, joining Vincent at his table without invitation. "Thought you'd sworn never to return to that mausoleum." Vincent maintained his composure, though he bristled internally at the characterization of Havenswood. "Circumstances change, Thornfield. The estate required my attention." "And the mysterious librarian, has she required your attention as well?" Thornfield's tone held a suggestive edge that Vincent found immediately distasteful. "I assume you're referring to Miss Astor, who served as governess in your household before my father employed her." Thornfield laughed, the sound coarse in the genteel surroundings of the club. "Employed her, yes. Along with other services, if rumors are to be believed. Though I must say, when she was in my household, she was remarkably resistant to similar arrangements." Vincent's hand tightened around his glass. "You would do well to moderate your insinuations, Thornfield. Miss Astor's reputation is beyond reproach, and as her employer, I take exception to any suggestion otherwise." "Employer?" Thornfield raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it? Come now, Fallsworth. Everyone knows your father installed her at Havenswood as his mistress. The only mystery is why you've permitted her to remain now that you've returned." It took every ounce of Vincent's self-control not to strike the man. Instead, he fixed Thornfield with an icy stare that had been known to silence even the most presumptuous society matrons. "Miss Astor was my father's wife, legally and properly married before his death. As the Dowager Duchess of Fallsworth, she is entitled to both respect and residence at Havenswood for her lifetime. I would thank you to correct any contrary impressions you may have shared in society." Thornfield's expression shifted from salacious amusement to shock. "His wife? But that's impossible. The old Duke was a confirmed recluse after your mother died. Everyone knew he'd never remarry." "Everyone was mistaken," Vincent said coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have pressing matters to attend to." As he left the club, Vincent realized he had just publicly acknowledged Amelia's status for the first time, a declaration that would spread through London society with the speed of wildfire. By morning, every drawing-room in Mayfair would be buzzing with the news that the old Duke had secretly remarried before his death, and that his son had now confirmed the unlikely union. The realization brought a surprising sense of relief. The secrecy surrounding his father's marriage to Amelia had been his father's choice, not his own. By acknowledging her rightful position, Vincent had taken the first step toward clarifying their relationship in the eyes of society, and perhaps in his own mind as well. That evening, he wrote to Amelia, explaining what had transpired at the club and his decision to publicly confirm her status. He wanted her to be prepared for the increased attention this revelation might bring, even at Havenswood. As he sealed the letter, Vincent found himself adding a postscript. I find London curiously empty without your presence. The library here lacks your organizational touch, and the evenings pass with far less intellectual stimulation than I have grown accustomed to. I shall return to Havenswood sooner than anticipated. My business here concludes more swiftly than expected. Until then, I remain yours sincerely, Vincent. The closing gave him pause. Yours sincerely, implying a personal connection beyond their formal relationship. Yet he let it stand, sensing that their correspondence had moved beyond conventional formalities, just as their relationship had evolved beyond simple definitions. 3 days later, Vincent departed London with a clarity of purpose he had not possessed when he arrived. His business affairs had been settled, his investments secured, and his decision regarding Havenswood's future had solidified into certainty. The journey back to Derbyshire seemed interminable, each mile increasing his impatience to return to the estate that had transformed from burden to sanctuary in the span of a single summer. As the carriage finally turned onto Havenswood's drive, the house rising before him against the backdrop of rolling hills, Vincent felt something he had rarely experienced in his adult life, the simple joy of coming home. Amelia was waiting on the steps as the carriage pulled up, her expression a mixture of welcome and something less easily defined, uncertainty, perhaps, or expectation. She wore a gown of deep blue that complemented her coloring more than her usual subdued greys and browns, and her hair was arranged more carefully than was her custom for every day at Havenswood. "Welcome back, Vincent," she said as he descended from the carriage. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Tedious but uneventful," he replied, drinking in the sight of her. "Your herbal remedies proved most effective against the headache that invariably accompanies long travel." She smiled, pleased. "I'm glad they were of use." As they entered the house, Vincent was struck by subtle changes in the entrance hall, fresh flowers in the urns, new beeswax polish on the oak paneling, a general air of renewal that had been absent when he first arrived. "You've been busy in my absence," he observed. "The harvest festival is approaching," she explained. "I took the liberty of beginning preparations, assuming you would wish to continue the tradition." "Indeed I do, though I confess my knowledge of the customary arrangements is limited." "I'll rely on your expertise." They fell into step together, moving toward the library as naturally as if no separation had occurred. Inside, Vincent found his favorite chair positioned near the window, a selection of books he had been consulting before his departure neatly arranged on the table beside it. "You've anticipated my return," he said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "I received your letter," Amelia acknowledged, a faint color rising in her cheeks. "You mentioned you would be returning earlier than planned." Vincent sat, gesturing for her to take the chair opposite. "And my other news, about Lord Thornfield and the revelation of your status." Amelia's expression grew more serious. "Yes, that was unexpected. I confess I'm unsure how to feel about it." "Does it concern you to have your position known?" "I believed keeping your status secret was unnecessary now that my father's wishes for discretion are no longer relevant." "It's not concern exactly," she said carefully. "More a recognition that once something is known, it cannot be unknown. There will be consequences to this revelation, Vincent. Questions about our living arrangements, speculation about your intentions." "My intentions?" She met his gaze directly. "Society will naturally wonder why you've chosen to maintain residence at Havenswood with your father's young widow, particularly now that her existence is publicly acknowledged." Vincent had considered this, of course. The revelation of Amelia's status would inevitably lead to speculation about their relationship, speculation that might not be entirely inaccurate, given the feelings he had begun to acknowledge during his time in London. "Let them wonder," he said with a confidence he did not entirely feel. "My decisions regarding Havenswood are not subject to society's approval." Amelia studied him, her perceptive gaze seeming to read more than he had explicitly stated. "Then you've made a decision about the estate?" "I have." Vincent leaned forward, his expression serious. "I will not be selling Havenswood, Amelia. I intend to maintain it as my primary residence, dividing my time between here and London as duties require. The joy that illuminated her face was worth any sacrifice the decision might entail. "That's wonderful news," she said softly. "Havenswood deserves to be lived in, to be part of a family's life again." "It deserves proper care and appreciation," Vincent agreed, "both of which it has received from you these past 5 years. I hope you'll continue to share in its management, though your role may need to evolve as circumstances change." A question formed in her eyes. Evolve in what way? Vincent hesitated, aware that they were approaching a threshold neither had explicitly acknowledged. "That depends on a number of factors, including your wishes for your own future." "My wishes have always been simple," Amelia said carefully. "To have a place where I belong, to be useful. To find meaning in my work." "And is that enough?" Vincent asked, his voice lowering. "Or might you wish for more if circumstances permitted it?" The air between them seemed to still, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Amelia's gaze held his, neither retreating from the implications of his question nor rushing to embrace them. "What more did you have in mind?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Vincent could respond, Harrison appeared at the library door, clearing his throat discreetly. "Pardon the interruption, Your Grace, but a visitor has arrived. Lady Pembroke requests an immediate audience on a matter of some urgency." The moment fractured, reality reasserting itself between them. Vincent rose, frustrated by the timing, yet also relieved at the reprieve from a conversation he had perhaps initiated too hastily. "Please show Lady Pembroke to the blue drawing-room," he instructed. "I'll attend her directly." As Harrison departed, Vincent turned back to Amelia. "We should continue this discussion later, when we're less likely to be interrupted." She nodded, composure regained though her eyes still held questions. "Of course. I should see to dinner arrangements in any case. Will Lady Pembroke be staying?" "That remains to be seen. Her visit is unexpected, we have no close acquaintance." As Amelia left to attend to household matters, Vincent made his way to the blue drawing-room, curious about what could have brought Lady Pembroke to Havenswood. She was a prominent society matron whose husband's financial troubles he had learned of in London, but they moved in different circles and had never been particularly friendly. Lady Pembroke rose as he entered, her elaborate travelling costume suggesting she had come directly from the train station. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, with sharp features and shrewd eyes that assessed him with unconcealed interest. "Your Grace," she curtsied, "thank you for receiving me without notice. I apologize for the intrusion, but matters of some delicacy required personal discussion." "Of course, Lady Pembroke. Please be seated. May I offer you refreshment after your journey?" "Thank you, no. I prefer to address my purpose directly." She settled back into her chair, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. "I understand from my husband that you've publicly acknowledged your father's marriage to Miss Astor, or rather, to the Dowager Duchess of Fallsworth, as I suppose she must properly be addressed." Vincent maintained a neutral expression, despite his surprise at this direct approach. "That is correct. My father's marriage was private but entirely legal." "How fascinating," Lady Pembroke said, though her tone suggested less fascination than calculation. "A most unusual circumstance. The Ton is quite abuzz with the news." "I imagine they find ample subjects for gossip without requiring additions from Havenswood," Vincent replied coolly. Lady Pembroke smiled, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed. However, this particular revelation has broader implications than mere gossip. Your father's marriage potentially affects matters of inheritance, succession, and property, all subjects of considerable interest to those with connections to the Fallsworth estates." Vincent's wariness increased. "My father's will was clear. His marriage to Miss Astor altered nothing regarding the succession or the bulk of the estate. She received provisions appropriate to her position, nothing more." "Perhaps," Lady Pembroke conceded. "But there's the matter of issue." "Issue?" "Children, Your Grace. Was your father's marriage to Miss Astor fruitful?" The question was so unexpected and impertinent that Vincent momentarily lost his composure. "That is hardly an appropriate inquiry, Lady Pembroke. My father's marriage occurred shortly before his death. There were no children. Lady Pembroke's expression suggested she found this answer less than convincing. Are you certain? Because society finds it quite remarkable that you've chosen to maintain your father's widow in residence at Havenswood, a young, unrelated woman with whom you have no proper connection, save through a marriage many find suspect. Unless, of course, there were issue from that marriage that might explain your continued protection. The insinuation was clear. Lady Pembroke was suggesting that Amelia might have borne his father's child, and that Vincent's decision to maintain her at Havenswood was due to this hypothetical half-sibling rather than any personal interest in Amelia herself. Your speculation is both incorrect and offensive, Vincent said, his voice cold with anger. My father's marriage produced no children. My decision to honor his widow's right to residence at Havenswood stems from respect for his wishes and recognition of her legal status, nothing more. Of course, Lady Pembroke said, though her tone suggested continued skepticism. I merely thought to offer my assistance in managing what could become a rather delicate social situation. The Dowager Duchess's background and circumstances are unusual. Her integration into society will require careful handling if you wish to avoid unpleasantness. Vincent stood, signaling the end of the interview. While I appreciate your concern, Lady Pembroke, the Dowager Duchess's social standing is secure by virtue of her legal marriage to my father. Any unpleasantness would come only from those who fail to respect that reality. Lady Pembroke rose as well, clearly displeased by his dismissal. As you wish, Your Grace. I merely sought to be of service, given the peculiar circumstances. Society can be unkind to those who flout its conventions. Indeed, Vincent agreed, which is why I value Havenswood's distance from London's drawing rooms. Good day, Lady Pembroke. Harrison will see you out. As the door closed behind his unwelcome visitor, Vincent remained in the drawing room, troubled by the encounter. Lady Pembroke's visit revealed how quickly news of Amelia's status had spread through society, and how readily that society had constructed narratives to explain their unusual situation. The suggestion that Amelia might have borne his father's child was absurd, yet it highlighted the vulnerability of their position. Without a clear explanation for their continued association, speculation would inevitably fill the void, some of it potentially damaging to Amelia's reputation. When Amelia found him still in the drawing room an hour later, Vincent was standing at the window, lost in thought. Harrison mentioned Lady Pembroke has departed, she said, observing him with concern. Was her visit very troubling? Vincent turned to face her, struck anew by her quiet dignity. It was illuminating. She came to express society's curiosity about our situation. Amelia's expression grew understanding. I expected as much once your acknowledgement of our marriage became known. What form did this curiosity take? She suggested various explanations for your continued presence at Havenswood, some more palatable than others. Vincent hesitated, then added, there was speculation that my father's marriage to you might have produced a child. Amelia's eyes widened with genuine shock. That's absurd. Your father was already quite ill when we married. There was never any physical aspect to our relationship. I know, Vincent assured her. I dismissed the suggestion immediately. But it illustrates the kind of speculation we're likely to face. She sank into a chair, her composure momentarily shaken. I never considered. I've been sheltered here at Havenswood, away from such gossip. Perhaps I was naive to think we could continue, as we have been without consequences. Vincent moved to sit beside her, close enough to speak intimately, yet maintaining a proper distance. Lady Pembroke's visit has forced me to recognize that our situation requires clarification, not for society's benefit, but for our own peace of mind. What sort of clarification? Amelia asked, her gaze steady despite the uncertainty in her voice. Vincent took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would irrevocably alter their relationship. I've come to care for you, Amelia, not as my father's widow or as Havenswood's guardian, but as a woman of remarkable intelligence, strength, and kindness. A woman I find myself increasingly unable to imagine my life without. Color rose in Amelia's cheeks, but she did not look away. Vincent. Please let me finish, he said gently. I know our circumstances are unusual. I know society will question any connection between us. But I've spent my life allowing others' expectations to shape my choices, first in opposition to my father, then in conformity with my position. I'm tired of living for appearances rather than truth. And what is the truth? She asked softly. That I love you, Vincent said simply. That I want to build a life with you at Havenswood, not as my father's widow who happens to reside here, but as my wife and partner in every sense. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, though whether of joy or distress, Vincent couldn't immediately determine. You can't mean that. The scandal would be enormous. A man marrying his father's widow. Society would never accept it. Society's acceptance matters far less to me than your happiness, Vincent said. And mine. We would face criticism, certainly. There would be those who would never receive us, but we would have Havenswood and each other and whatever community we choose to build around us. He reached for her hand, encouraged when she did not withdraw it. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I know this comes as a surprise, perhaps even a shock. I only ask that you consider the possibility of a future together, openly and honestly, without the shadow of my father's arrangements hanging between us. Amelia's fingers tightened around his, her expression a complex mixture of hope and uncertainty. I need time to think, Vincent. This is unexpected. Of course, he agreed, releasing her hand reluctantly. Take all the time you need. My feelings won't change. She rose, her composure visibly fragile. I think I'll retire early this evening. Today has been rather overwhelming. Of course, rest well, Amelia. As she left the room, Vincent remained seated, aware that he had just risked everything on a declaration he hadn't planned to make yet, had been building toward since his return from London. The possibility of her rejection existed, of course. Amelia might value her independence too much to consider another marriage, or might feel that accepting his proposal would confirm society's worst suspicions about her relationship with his father. Yet he found himself oddly at peace with the uncertainty. For the first time in his adult life, Vincent had spoken his heart's truth without calculation or constraint. Whatever came next would be based on honesty rather than convention, a foundation far stronger than the careful facades he had maintained for so long. As darkness fell over Havenswood, Vincent made his way to the library, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings that had witnessed so many of their conversations. He selected a volume of poetry, Wordsworth, from Amelia's collection at the cottage, and settled in to read, allowing the rhythms of verse to soothe his restless thoughts. Tomorrow would bring Amelia's answer, whatever it might be. Until then, he would wait, surrounded by the books she had so carefully preserved and the home she had helped him rediscover. Vincent woke before dawn, sleep having proved elusive despite his exhaustion. He dressed simply and made his way downstairs, avoiding the main staircase to minimize the chance of encountering servants who would be surprised by his early rising. The house was silent, the first pale light of morning barely illuminating the corridors as he moved toward the library. To his surprise, a faint glow showed beneath the door. Someone was already there. He hesitated, then pushed the door open quietly. Amelia sat in her usual chair by the window, a single candle burning beside her, illuminating her profile as she gazed out at the lightening sky. She had clearly been there for some time, dressed in a simple morning gown, her hair loosely braided over one shoulder. She turned at his entrance, and Vincent was struck by the peace in her expression, a calm certainty that hadn't been there when they parted the previous evening. "You're awake early," he said softly, not wanting to disturb the tranquility of the moment. "I hardly slept," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." Vincent remained by the door, suddenly uncertain of his welcome. "I can leave you to your contemplation, if you prefer." "No, please stay," she gestured to the chair opposite hers. "I've been waiting for you actually. I thought you might rise early." He joined her by the window, where the first golden light of dawn was beginning to touch the gardens beyond. The candle between them seemed almost superfluous now, yet its warm glow created an intimacy that the growing daylight hadn't yet dispelled. "You've had time to consider my words," Vincent said, neither question nor demand. "Yes." Amelia's hands were folded in her lap, her posture composed yet not distant. I've thought of little else since we spoke. And your thoughts? She smiled slightly, many and contradictory, fear and hope, doubt and certainty. The practical and the passionate arguing within me all night. A familiar debate, Vincent acknowledged, one I've had with myself these past weeks. And which side prevailed for you? She asked. Hope, he said simply. The hope that what we might build together would be worth whatever challenges we face. Amelia nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she had already determined. I have been alone for most of my life, she said quietly. Even during my marriage to your father, there was a solitude in my position, a separation from both the family I served and the servants I directed. I became accustomed to that solitude. I found strength in it. Vincent listened, sensing she needed to express these thoughts without interruption. When you arrived at Havenswood, she continued, I expected only to fulfill my promise to your father, to help you understand what he had tried to preserve for you, and then to step aside. I never anticipated, she paused, collecting herself. I never imagined that you would see me as anything more than an obligation inherited from him. Is that what you fear? Vincent asked gently. That my feelings are somehow an extension of duty to my father's memory? No, she said with surprising certainty. I know your feelings are your own, just as I know mine have nothing to do with my promise to him. She reached across the small table between them, offering her hand. Vincent took it, feeling the warmth of her fingers as they curled around his. I love you, Vincent, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the declaration. Not as the Duke of Fallsworth or as my late husband's son, but as the man I've come to know these past months, thoughtful, honorable, capable of growth and change. A man I would choose freely, regardless of title or position. Joy surged through Vincent, almost overwhelming in its intensity. Then you'll marry me. Yes, she said, her smile breaking through like sunshine. Though we should have no illusions about the difficulties ahead, society will judge us harshly. There will be those who never accept our union. Society has always found reasons to judge, Vincent said. I would rather face its censure together than live by its rules apart. He rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as if designed for this embrace. Vincent looked down at her upturned face, illuminated by both the growing daylight and the steady flame of her candle. The light of your candle led me home, he said softly, to Havenswood, to myself, to you. I will spend my life being worthy of that guidance. We will guide each other, Amelia corrected gently. That is what true partners do. Vincent lowered his lips to hers, sealing their agreement with a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. As they stood together in the library where so much of their relationship had evolved, the first full light of morning streamed through the windows, bathing them in gold. Outside, Havenswood awaited, no longer a burden to be escaped, but a legacy to be honored. No longer a prison of memories, but a foundation for the future. And at its heart, a love that had transcended convention, expectation, and the shadows of the past to find its own unorthodox but undeniable truth. Vincent drew back slightly, keeping Amelia within the circle of his arms. When shall we marry? I find myself suddenly impatient to begin our life together properly. She laughed, the sound bright with happiness. Perhaps we should allow the scandal of our engagement to settle before creating the even greater scandal of our marriage. A few months at least. A few months, he agreed reluctantly. Though I intend to court you properly during that time. No more hiding our feelings behind propriety and caution. I would like that, Amelia said, her eyes alight with joy. Though I suspect Havenswood's servants already have few illusions about the nature of our relationship. Then we'll give them the satisfaction of being proven right, Vincent said, kissing her again with growing confidence. And when the time comes, we'll be married here at Havenswood, among those who truly care for our happiness rather than in London under society's critical gaze. Amelia nodded, her expression thoughtful. Your father would have approved, I think. Not of our marriage, that would have shocked even him, but of your decision to make Havenswood your home again. That was his deepest wish. Perhaps in that wish, if in little else during his life, we found a common purpose, Vincent acknowledged. though what I build here with you will be very different from what he knew." "As it should be," Amelia agreed. "Each generation shapes Havenswood according to its own vision. Ours will be one of renewal and growth, of family and community." The word family lingered between them, rich with possibility. Vincent hadn't thought beyond the immediate future of their marriage, but now the prospect of children, of continuing the Fallsworth line in a home filled with love rather than constraint, added new depth to his vision for Havenswood. As they stood together in the growing light, plans and promises flowing between them as naturally as breath, Vincent felt the last shadows of his past receding. The burden he had carried since childhood, the belief that love was a weakness, that vulnerability led only to pain, dissolved in the warmth of Amelia's presence. His father's final gift had indeed been Havenswood, but not in the way either of them had expected. Through Amelia, the old Duke had preserved not just buildings and books, but the possibility of redemption, the chance for his son to discover a love that transformed rather than diminished, that strengthened rather than weakened. And as the candle between them finally flickered out, unnecessary in the full light of morning, Vincent silently acknowledged that perhaps, in this one thing at least, his father had been wiser than he had ever guessed.